Hello and welcome to the Cryptocurrency News Channel. We're going to talk a little bit about today's price action, the Valkyrie ETF, why there might be more than one ETF that's actually being approved, and the long-term effects of this ETF. We're also going to mention the type of ETF that's actually going to be approved. So we have another big indicator that an ETF is soon going to be approved. This is from Cointelegraph, and this comes from the exact NASDAQ's vice president. And they said shares of Valkyrie's Bitcoin ETF had been certified for listing on the exchange. Now, there is no reason you would certify shares of something on an exchange if you weren't going to list them very soon, because that would be, completely pointless. So this is pretty much almost certain proof that the ETF will be approved probably next week, and that's why we've shot up. Now, the Valkyrie is a Bitcoin futures ETF. It is a Bitcoin futures cash settled ETF. So it's actually settled in cash. It's still not as good as a Bitcoin ETF because, all you have to do is buy futures contracts to back it, whereas an actual Bitcoin ETF, you have to buy Bitcoin to back it. So it doesn't quite put the squeeze on the supply like we had hoped it would. But it is a step in the right direction. Let me remind you that most of the ETFs that have been filed are real Bitcoin ETFs and not just Bitcoin future ETFs. So hopefully we'll get one approved in the future that actually is real Bitcoin ETF. So I'm pretty sure, I'm like 95% certain that there will be an ETF next week or the week afterwards because like I said, NASDAQ wouldn't really list something if it wasn't going to get eminently listed because that would be totally and utterly pointless. The SEC has accepted the registration request for shares of Valkyrie's Bitcoin Strategy ETF for listing on NASDAQ. In a letter from NASDAQ Vice President of Listing Qualifications, filed the same day the exchange that Valkyrie's Bitcoin ETF shares had been certified. So it's pretty much confirmed. So it offers indirect exposure to the crypto asset with cash settled futures, like we said. Now, there is evidence that more than one Bitcoin ETF, probably more than one Bitcoin's futures ETF, will actually be approved very soon. Gensler and the SEC said they're not going to block it. And if they approved one Bitcoin futures ETF, there's very little reason they wouldn't accept the other two or three. So you could have three of them floating around. However, the prospects for an actual Bitcoin ETF that's not futures but actually Bitcoin backed is much more grim. I don't think one will actually get approved this year, but I'm really hoping that one does because that would be the real deal. This is like almost the real deal, but not quite the real deal. And I'm looking for the real deal, obviously. Now, what does this actually mean for the future? Well, like we said, the futures ETF is not an actual Bitcoin ETF, but these things can actually be used to manipulate the price of Bitcoin. Same thing with an actual Bitcoin ETF. That will actually be used to manipulate the price of Bitcoin as well. So in the long run, the ETFs, they will actually be used by the fat cats to actually kind of control the price of the commodity. Like, I think they do that with like gold and silver and some other commodities. So in the long run, you'd be justified to say like, it could be bad in the long run, but all mature markets have these ETFs, so it was going to come sooner or later anyways. In the short run, however, it definitely pumps Bitcoin up. And if a real Bitcoin ETF gets passed, I think we'll pump up even higher. I think for the purposes of this cycle, I think this will push us easily past 100K, even just these Bitcoin futures ETFs because of the bullish sentiment. But you guys have to watch out because this is a manipulative tool and they could actually reverse manipulate it down once we get past a certain price. The banks and the fat cats and the big funds will actually use these things to try to control the price of Bitcoin. Since Bitcoin is somewhat decentralized, it is going to be harder for them to manipulate the price of Bitcoin this way. But you can sure as bet they're sure as hell going to try. So you need to watch out for that. And this is why it's very, very crucial that you take profits, even more now since these ETFs exist. Because this is an extra manipulation tool, extra price control tool that the big guys have now because they can just buy a bunch of futures and shift the price that way with these ETFs and the expiry dates and everything. It's all coming together, whereas the best strategy is to DCA in, but then take your profits when they're actually available. Yeah, you can't just look back and say like, oh, I could have made more, I should have stayed in. No, that's going to get you wrecked. You need to take your profits when they're available, when they become available. So with the ETF in, if it shoots up, you got to take some profits, especially on the altcoins. If Bitcoin shoots up and altcoins start falling, within 2 or 3 days, they're going to shoot up probably several 100% maybe. And at that time, you got to take profits and not just hold on for more and more gains, because that's going to get you wrecked just like last time. And this is even more so with more tools at the fat cat's disposal for manipulating Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to be harder to manipulate because it is decentralized, but it is still very much manipulable. So that is the news for today. Let me know what you think. Like and subscribe and hit that bell notifications button. Thank you and have a nice day.